Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Coroner Talk. We've got a great episode this week. We're going to talk about managing a scene. We're going to talk about being the one person in charge of the scene and how sometimes command staff can cause problems and interfere with the scene. But I've got a couple of new reviews that I want to share with you. I try to share these randomly as we get them, and we've got a couple of good ones. I've got bad ones in the past, of course, too. But I want to reach out and just say a big thank you to the original Ranger Dave. I'm not sure who that is, but the original Ranger Dave. And it says, having spent 32 years in state government, 5 with corrections, 27 with Department of Natural Resources, including 24 in law enforcement, I am currently the coroner-elect in my community. I will begin training on Sunday at our State Public Safety Training Center. I've been listening to Darren's podcast and went all the way back to the beginning to listen. Side note, that was back in 2014, and those weren't very good back then. They may not be great now, but way back then, things were a whole lot different. Okay, back on this. He does an excellent job and features wonderful, knowledgeable guests. I'm glad I stumbled upon this podcast by accident and recently purchased his book, Code. Thank you very much for that. Which I am reading now. He always ends his podcast with a personal note encouraging listeners to be a blessing to someone else. Yes, I do. I've done that since the very beginning. I think our world would be better if we would do that. So, 5-star rating, the original Ranger Dave. Thank you for that. I like hearing the good stuff. Sometimes people will only want to tell the bad stuff, so it's nice hearing the good every once in a while. And then here's one more. The CMO 05235. Whoever that is. Title of the review is great. 5 stars. I've been a deputy coroner for 10 years. Listening to the right, wrong way to be a coroner really hit on a different leadership that I've witnessed over the years and how it has affected the way we are treated in the field. Thank you for shedding light on this field. So again, thank you so much for that. I love getting these comments on the podcast itself. And if you haven't left a rating or review in a while, it'd be great if you did. Not too many people leave a rating. You can go in and just leave a star rating, or you can actually leave a review. Those really, really help. Really, the bad ones that I've received over the years, the really bad ones, are just because I hit a sensitive topic that somebody got offended by, and, you can't please everybody. So otherwise, they're all pretty good, and I like to hear from you. So yeah, if you haven't left a rating or review for a while, please do that. We would love to hear your comments. And if you like the show, it helps other people look at the reviews and say, yeah, I'm going to give this show a try or not. And I used to say this years ago, give me 3 shows. You may not like today's show, but if you give me 3 shows, you're probably going to find something in there that you like. All right, let's get into today's topic. So I've got kind of one topic with 3 points to make within it. And so, but wait, before I get into that, let me say one more thing here. As you've noticed over the last couple of months, I have brought in Jeff Gentry. We've got some other people that I think are going to do some podcast recordings for us. And so I hope you enjoy those. If you have a topic that you want, email us. You can go to the website and just hit the contact button and email us a topic. If you have a topic you want to record, I can help you do that. Love to get you on the show. I'm trying to get this show, again, we've been at this since 2014. We've taken breaks here and there, but I would love to have, there's supposed to be a peer-to-peer environment, so I would love to have other of you on the show. If you have a podcast and somehow you're listening to mine as well, love to have you on the show, talk about your topic, and then we can promote your podcast. Now, obviously, it needs to have something to do with death investigation, law enforcement, or life. I probably don't want the, something totally off the wall like business management or email marketing. That really doesn't going to help. But if you have a podcast and it fits, certainly let's do that. I love to have different people on the show to give different perspectives. Okay, off of that, back on to what we started to talk about. Failing to manage a crime scene process. So I teach this a lot when we, if you've ever been in a class of mine where we're talking about, either the 2-day medical legal or 5-day medical legal, one of the things that I spend some time on are 12 mistakes. And there's 12 mistakes that happens often at crime scenes, death scenes, that can derail the entire investigation. And one of those is failing to manage the crime scene process. And with that comes working together as a team and command staff interference. And so I want to talk about all of that. Depending on the level of the case, someone needs to be in charge of that scene. Now, you may have, it may be a small scene, meaning grandpa didn't wake up this morning, or you may have a triple homicide, or the governor's plane may have crashed. Okay. So you've got all of these big scenes or small scenes that you kind of work in and through. But someone needs to be in charge of that. Now, who's in charge of a death scene overall? In most instances, it's the police. Law enforcement is in charge of the scene. Coroners, of course, are in charge of the body. Anything in, on, or around the body. Now, that includes the scene because there's a lot of things in the scene, maybe not at the body, but in the scene itself or in the house or in the area that the coroner needs to be involved in because it helps him or her determine cause and manner. The law enforcement and the MDI, which is medical legal death investigator, that's coroner or medical examiner investigator, law enforcement and MDI must work together. So if we can say that the law enforcement is in charge of the scene, but the coroner's in charge of the body, but they need to work together. Now, who's in charge of the scene as a one person? So if we have a scene that's being investigated, so these are some hypotheticals, but let's say it is just dead grandpa. In many cases the coroner is going to be in charge of the scene. Now, hear me out here before you start throwing rocks. The law enforcement isn't going to investigate that. They might write a report, a paragraph report. They came, they saw, you showed up, and they were done. Really, And in that case, the coroner is going to be more responsible for the scene and the process of the scene. There are things that you may ask the law enforcement to do for you if you're the coroner. If you're law enforcement, you may protect the scene and help the coroner or MDI, but the MDI is probably the one going to be more in charge because there's really not a police scene. There's really not an investigation per se, unless something changes. But let's say it's a big case. Let's say it's a suicide or it's a homicide or it's a double homicide or something where now we have a case. Like we got detectives coming and we're going to have to shut the road down or we're going to shut the area down, cordon off the block, whatever. We got a thing. In that situation, someone needs to be in charge. And it's not going to be the MDI because the MDI is not going to be the one to shut down city blocks or things like that. Now, I know some who do. I know some that is involved more in the law enforcement side. Yes. But law enforcement, by and large, is going to be involved in that. It does not have to be a ranking member of the department. So I'm going to go with the thought process that law enforcement is in charge of the scene. So one person needs to be in charge of that scene from law enforcement. Doesn't have to be anybody of rank, doesn't have to be a captain, doesn't have to be a colonel, doesn't have to be a police chief. It might be, but doesn't have to be. It might just be, the rookie officer. It might be a sergeant. It might be a detective. But here's what I mean by managing the process. You have to have someone oversee the process so that all the little stuff doesn't get lost. If one person isn't in charge and everyone is doing their own thing without any structure, then the process breaks down and you've realized later, oh, we didn't do this. I thought you were going to do that. And now we have a real problem. So this investigator, whoever that is, whoever the one person in charge, should oversee the investigation and the scene documentation. Now, in smaller departments, that may be, the person in charge may also be the one taking photographs and documenting. Nothing wrong with that. But if the person in charge is too busy trying to process the scene, they're not looking over the rest of the scene, right? So when I say someone needs to be in charge, it needs to be someone that isn't necessarily down on the ground, doing castings, taking photographs, examining bodies, dusting for fingerprints. It needs to be someone that oversees all of those, okay? They should ensure chain of custody and the evidence is documented correctly. And if you don't, then you don't maintain scene integrity. You need to be sure that you're not allowing officers to use the restroom within the residence or take food or drink from the kitchen. You need to make sure that if there are officers gathering around outside, that they are in an area away from the scene. One thing, and I can say this because I've been in law enforcement for many, many years. One thing we can do is stand around and talk. We can smoke our cigars, drink our coffee, chew tobacco, and we can stand around and talk. So if you got a bunch of police officers in your area, in your scene that's not doing something, either give them a job or let them stand somewhere else because they're going to mess up your scene. Well, that takes one person being in charge to be able to tell those people, hey, can you guys step over on the other side of the street? And then at the same time, being able to make sure that whoever's collecting evidence is doing that correctly. And we never want to bring food from the outside into the scene. Never bring anything into the scene. But that takes somebody watching everyone. And then that also now comes into managing the body. The victim's body should always be inspected and searched for trace evidence before being moved from the scene. If that's not done, then there could be valuable evidence lost that you will never find again because during the moving process it gets destroyed or it gets lost. And that's going to be your MDI's job. But that person that's in charge of a big investigation, they need to also ensure that no one is manipulating that body except for the MDI, and certainly not before photographs are taken. And I cannot stress this enough. If you have the ability to ensure that no one covers the body with anything at or near the scene. Now, I don't like it when paramedics pull blankets out of their ambulances and cover a body. That's bad. I don't want anything touching the body. I think it's worse, however, when a police officer gets a sheet or a blanket or something out of the linen closet or out of the dirty hamper or something like that and covers the victim. Because now if there's trace evidence found on the body, it could be argued that it got transferred there from what was in the laundry. And I bring this up because I had a case years ago where that happened, where an officer was waiting on me. I was a detective. An officer was waiting on me to get there, and there was a woman, mostly nude, in the hallway of the house, and she'd been dead 2 or 3 days. The officer didn't want to look at her naked body, but also wanted to give her some modesty and some be good to the victim. Got a blanket or a sheet out of the linen closet and covered her up. Well, there was fiber evidence found on the body. That proved broke up boyfriend, they've been estranged for a couple of months, but was stalking her. That was hair belonging to him. Well, it was argued then that hair put there by him when he assaulted and killed her, or was it put on her because it came off the sheet that was in the linen closet? Now that case got won, but it was very, very hard. Luckily, there was a lot of other evidence. So you can introduce evidence to the body if you cover the body up. But this is why we need one person looking at it all and making sure that these things are not done. Someone is in charge and making sure that things are done in a proper order and that no one's doing something that they're not supposed to do. And then that takes me into failing to work together as a team. Now, I know in other shows, other episodes, I have talked about teamwork. And what's that saying? Teamwork makes the dream work, or something like that. There's no I in team and all that other stuff. But teamwork is important, and it's not just teamwork within your department. And I think we've all been in these situations where you have two departments that don't work well together. Sometimes you have people within a department that don't work well together. You've got the local police chief that ran for sheriff, lost, but, said a bunch of bad things about the sheriff that did win. But then, of course, he kept his job as police chief. So now the sheriff and the police chief don't get along. And now that's not happened in my area. I'm just saying as an example. I've heard of that. And now it boils down to the officers because the sheriff's like, no, you're not going to be there. You're not going to help them. Don't go to those scenes, whatever. And sometimes they end up on the same scene and it becomes chaotic because there's no cooperation. There are some states that have highway patrol and others that have state police. In states that have highway patrols, the sheriff is the highest ranking law enforcement official in the county. Now, if you have state police, then a lot of times, in those situations, the state police actually have the highest authority. There can be a time when, whether you're dealing with the highway patrol or state police, whatever their name is, sometimes they feel like because they've got a state commission or they're being paid by the state that somehow they're better than everyone else. And that's usually an officer thing. When that happens, then it becomes a problem on the scene because they're trying to exert their dominance when in fact they don't really have the power to do that. And it causes this hate and discontent. And generally that's done before the scene. So whenever you all end up at the same scene, then no one wants to talk to each other. You don't want to share information. And if you're going to work a death scene that it's going to take multiple agencies, whether it could just be 3 officers, but multiple agencies, you've got to get along. Cooperation is critical when you're dealing with different agencies. Depending on the level of the case, certainly when you have multiple agencies involved, there's going to be a lot of spotlight on these cases. If it's big enough to have 2 or 3 agencies involved, that means it's a bigger incident. You have egos to deal with, and when you're trying to take the spotlight, your people have egos to fight against each other, the scenes can become disastrous really, really quickly. So without that teamwork, number one, without the one person in charge, and then having teamwork below that, the lead investigators can lose control of the scene. There's no cooperation, so then the person that's supposed to be in charge, kind of guiding the scene as a whole, can't do that because the team is fighting against each other, and it may be against the lead person as well. And one of the most significant issues in an investigation, not just at the scene, but then after the scene as well, is not communicating, not sharing information. Some agencies seem to want to keep everything they know to themselves. And generally that's because of egos or turf wars. And that will compromise an investigation. Now, I understand there are times that you should keep some things, in your under wraps or whatever, but let me give you 2 examples that I've heard about. One happened many years ago. A detective went to a detective a county detective went to a detective in a city and said, hey, this has been years ago. Hey, there's a guy growing marijuana behind his gas tank at this house over here, and I'm going to go get it, he said. I'm just letting you know because it's your town, and I'm, doing an investigation in your town, so courtesy. Okay, great. So that young detective gets back in his car. He goes to that house, pulls in the driveway, and as he gets out of the car, the homeowner is coming around the corner carrying 2 marijuana plants in buckets and saying, oh, yeah, Detective so-and-so called me, told me you were coming over to get these. That's crazy. Like, why would you call and say the detective coming over? Well, then you get to where, I don't want to share information. So then Detective 1 doesn't want to share information with Detective 2 because it's been proven that he'll call and tell the suspect. That's not good. And then I've heard of situations where there's been a county working with drug task force, and they're working in a town watching some dope sales go on in a hotel, and there's an officer on for the city that does a lot of drug cases. He recognizes that there's a person there that's been coming and going from the hotel for the last couple of days that's a known drug distributor. And on one afternoon, he notices that the guy had came out of the hotel, got in his car, and the officer followed, and it wasn't hard to make a probable cause stop. He didn't signal, rolled through a stop sign, whatever, a couple things, stopped him, found dope in the car, made the arrest, towed the car, did the whole thing. A day later, the county showed up at this police department mad because you screwed up our investigation. We were going to make controlled buys. We were involved in an investigation there. We were what? And then the thing was, well, you should have contacted us before you stopped. You guys should talk to us before. Well, I can't call you every time they're going to make a traffic stop, they said. The problem was the county didn't share information with the city that they were working an investigation at the hotel. Had they done that, then the city would have stayed away from the hotel and let them work their investigation. But because there was no sharing of information, the investigation kind of got messed up. Now, those aren't death cases, but those are examples of not sharing information. And in death cases, there's been times where we're working an investigation into a death, and a city, a county, another agency has information about a suspect, maybe about this person's history, and it's nearly impossible to get the information out of that agency because they don't want to share anything. They've got a case on him in the past, but they don't want to share it with you. That's bad police work. That's bad police work, and it's going to cause scenes not to get processed correctly, and it's going to cause people not to get convicted. That's what's going to happen. Everyone involved in an investigation that has information gathered from their individual jobs and their individual assignments, when they're unwilling to share the information, when it's discovered, it can lead the entire team looking as though they have failed the investigation because they were acting on information that they had, but had they known the other information, it wouldn't have made the investigation falter. So it's imperative to remember that cases you work aren't about you. They're not about your ego. They're about the victim. They're about the family. They're about prosecution. They're about society. Not about you. And it takes a team to make sure that these things are prosecuted correctly. A baseball game is won when everyone does his or her job and supports the other player. And I use this example, and this is a great example when it comes to teamwork. It's a baseball thing. Imagine the bottom of the ninth, the game is tied, and the next ball is hit to the pitcher who misses, but scoops it up, sets down, and refuses to let anyone else take the baseball from him. Now, the pitcher did their job and pitched, but then refused to share the scoop with their teammates, resulted in a complete failure for everyone. Hey, he pitched the ball. That's his job. But all of a sudden now it's hit to him. He picks it up, but that's it. I'm not going to give it to anyone else. And that happens in basketball games too. I don't play much basketball, but I've seen some 3-on-3 games with, just some pop-up games, whatever. And the ball hogs, they make the game horrible because they always want the ball. They always want to make the shot, and no one else seems to be able to take the shot because they're a ball hog. That can happen in scenes as well. It's disastrous. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes nobody really knows. It doesn't really matter. But when it does matter, it's horrible. So that brings me to my last point. Someone needs to be managing the scene. We need to make sure we're getting along. Then we have the problem of command staff or administrative staff interfering. Now, if you're in a department where the police chief is the lead investigator and the police chief is there or the sheriff is there literally working the scene, then I'm good with that. That's fine, because that's their job. If, however, you're in a department where there's many layers of people between the sheriff or the police chief and you, probably they're not going to be on the scene investigating. But when they come, they can cause problems. And it's frustrating when command staff show up at a scene with their own agendas and nothing actually to do with the investigation. It might be political. It might be their curiosity. It might be they're bored at the office, and so they stop by. It causes problems because if the sheriff or police chief is there and they ask a younger officer to go do something, they'll just go do it because the sheriff said so. But yet the person in charge of the scene, the investigator, had sent this young officer to do something else, and now the police chief has derailed them. That can cause a problem. And I'm not just talking about police chiefs and sheriffs. I make this reference all the time that, the captain of the civil division. Civil officers or officers of the court serve papers, subpoenas, summonses, divorce papers, and the captain of the civil division is bored and hears that there's a neat case going on. So they roll up to the scene and they get out, and they're not there to investigate. Number one, they don't investigate. They've long passed that. They're now captain of the civil division. Go serve some divorce papers, sir. Why are you here in my crime scene? So they're going to walk around, look at stuff, maybe pick stuff up, but they're not doing anything. They're not there to investigate. They're not there to work. And if you ask them to do something, no, they're not there for that. They're just curious. It's curious. That can add to or take away evidence. It can cause things to get messed up. They shouldn't be there. If command staff is there to work, then that's great. But if they're just there to see what's going on, that's not good. And there's another reason why command staff should not be at a scene if they are not actively involved in investigation and if they are the ones that are going to be talking to the press. So if your command staff or your information officer, whichever that may be, or both, they should not be at the scene because there are things within the scene that you may not want the press to know. And if while they're in the scene, they leave the scene and they immediately go talk to the press, either right then or within an hour or two, they might accidentally reveal something that should not have been revealed. Maybe they didn't know it was important not to share it because they haven't had a debriefing. Maybe they knew they shouldn't, but then they just slipped up and said something they shouldn't have said. But had they not known, then they would not have been able to slip up. And so what should happen is, okay, chief of detectives, sheriff, police chief, name your command staff position. If you want a full discussion on this case and a full debriefing, I will be glad to give that to you tomorrow. So right now you're working the scene. Tomorrow you can sit down and tell the sheriff everything about it, and then even the things that are pertinent to the investigation. And then that information officer, that sheriff, that police chief, then has time to process what should or should not be said. Then they can talk to the press if that happens, and they know what should or shouldn't be said. But if they're in the scene and talking to the press right away, they might mess up and say things they shouldn't. So as we know, death investigations are not always simple. They're not always step-by-step cutouts that everything works the same. But having a plan, having attention to detail, having someone in charge of the scene, whether it's a big scene or a small scene, a lot of these mistakes can be avoided because everyone gets along. Everyone's at the same end goal. I think I talked about with photographs. The MDI, the coroner medical examiner investigator, should take their photographs, and law enforcement should take their own photographs. And I mentioned that a couple episodes ago. We're looking at things different. The same, but a little different slant. Again, that's teamwork. We all have our own jobs to do, but then when we do our jobs in an orderly fashion, getting along with each other while someone is guiding the investigation, then we have a debriefing to share information. Then we can decide what we've missed or what we need to go back and get more information of, and the investigation can go correctly. But if everybody's out there doing their own thing, people who should not be in the scene are walking around, touching stuff, looking at stuff, tracking evidence in, tracking evidence out, your scene is going to become a disaster really, really quickly. You should develop some pretty strict procedures of how death scenes are managed. And actually, any crime scene, we're talking about death scenes, of course, but how death scenes are managed, who is and is not in control, and who should or should not be there. You need to get buy-in from your command staff, from your chief of detectives and the sheriffs and whatever structure you have, and everybody follow it. And then along with that, there needs to be an effort to ensure that everyone on the scene is getting along. If there are problems between departments, it needs to be worked out ahead of time. If these two particular officers don't get along, then they probably shouldn't be at the same death scene. And if they have to be, then they need to put their problems aside to work the case. And many of you have experienced some of the things I've just went over, and you know how bad it can really kill a scene. But again, having protocols in place, following them every single time, the death scenes will be worked much smoother And then the prosecution will be smoother. The worst thing in the world is 6 months, a year later, to get on the stand and the whole scene was chaos and everything was screwed up. And now you, being the lead detective or the coroner that has to tell your part of the case, it's all screwed up because of many things that happened a year ago. So have a plan, work the plan, and work the plan together. All right, I'm going to end today's show there. Work together. Be team players. Don't get in each other's way. Remember, if you want to be on the show, reach out to me. Love to have you on the show. As this comes out live, it is in July of 2024. Remember, we have the 5-day MDI course in Springfield, Missouri. 40 hours in classroom, 5 days in classroom, and then like 22 or 24 hours online after that. Great, fantastic class. We teach you how to do your job from a scene level, not from a 50,000-foot theory. Everyone that comes out of that class says it was well worth their time. Breakfast, lunch is included, 5 instructors, lots of information. It is a really good time, really good week, and you learn a lot. So whether you're a police officer, law enforcement officer, coroner, medical examiner, investigator, we've had attorneys, border patrol, state police, city police, from multiple states, usually 6-7 states represented. So you'll have a lot of networking time. You'll have a lot of time to meet with the people that that can share information about what they do in their areas. It is just a fantastic class. So again, you can go to the website, go to the academy, find that. It's really easy to find, and would love to see you there. It would be worth your time to be there, make you a much better investigator. You say, well, I've been investigating death for 20 years. Okay, great. So why don't you come, and why don't we teach you some basics again, and then maybe teach you some advanced stuff when it comes to bones and fire and things like that, and you'll still learn stuff. You'll never be the person that you better not ever be the person that stops learning. And if you are an investigator for 20 years and you have all this great information, then you can come and learn stuff, but then you also can share during our group discussions and some of our question and answer sessions, and you can share your experience as well. So everybody then comes out better than they went in. And that's another reason how we can be a blessing to everyone, is everyone around us that is in a class gets your knowledge. And now that's a way of blessing them and their life. So in some way, however, in your life, in your everyday life, find a way to be a blessing, whether it be opening somebody's door, whether it be sending somebody flowers. Make sure it's your wife, or you're single. Don't be sending random women flowers. That could get you in trouble. But find a way, just smile and say hi. You know how rare it is in some places for someone to smile and say hi? In the Midwest, I've been in Wyoming, Montana, those areas as well. You get that a lot. You go out to the West Coast or the East Coast and L.A. or New York, some of those places, man, they'd rather cut you as to smile at you. And so just by smiling and opening a door for somebody, if you live in those areas, that's going to make their day. Well, they're probably going to think you're crazy, but that's going to make their day because no one ever does that. And that gives them a little hope, a little happiness. And that's what this world needs. So till next week, everybody, I want you back. Be safe.
Thanks for listening to Coroner Talk, a DSBN media production. Visit our website at coronertalk.com. And be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/coronertraining. 3617 1024 scene en route to morgue.